a researcher at the Institute of Social Ecology, at University of Natural Resources and Applied Sciences in Vienna. She has a background in ecology and a PhD in the field of social ecology. She has been conducting research in the field of resources and land use for almost 20 years and is interested in social science questions such as how actors make decisions about resources use and land management and the role of institutions and frameworks that influence these decision-making processes. Her research projects use interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary methods. Much of her work has taken place in eLTER regions. She has been active in eLTER in Austria for many years and recently also at the European level. And then I will now, so I don't stop you like in the middle of a presentation. I will briefly introduce Daniel as well, who is a social ecologist and associate professor in the Faculty of Agriculture and Town Planning at the Technion, Israel University of Technology. He holds master's degree in research ecology from Ben Orion University and a PhD in interdisciplinary environmental studies from Brown University. Daniel's research focuses on human interactions with nature, the benefits that humans derive from these interactions, and the integration of scientific research into policy and management. He serves on the Science Committee and Central Coordination Committee for the eLTER, where he works to encourage policy-relevant whole ecosystem research. And with that, I give the floor to our presenters.
Okay. Hi, welcome everybody. And my screen is clear and my voice is clear? Great. So thank you, first of all, for the organizers for organizing the webinar. I think it was a wonderful idea, and I'm sorry that I didn't attend last week's, so I could draw a better direct line of thought from last week's to this week's. But we have three speakers today. Veronika and I will give the first talk about social considerations within the WAILS concept, and both of us will provide examples from our experiences working in two different long-term social ecological research platforms, one in the Negev highlands, an arid environment in southern Israel, and the other in Eisenwurz, a mountain environment in Austria. So I will start with my reviewing. I'm not sure how many of you were in the previous meeting, but for those of you who weren't, we are talking about a conceptual framework or a model that eLTER has been building to express the interdisciplinary nature of the work that we do as a collective within the research infrastructure. And that model is based on two other models. One is called the press pulse dynamic model, which speaks to the interaction of social and biophysical systems and how they both affect each other and there are feedbacks between them. And the other is a macroecology model in which patterns of ecosystem patterns and processes occur at different spatial scales and interact between them from the local to the global scale and back again. So those are the two models that we work with, and I'm not going to go into it further than that, assuming that most of you had attended last week or have some understanding of what this model is. So the example that I'm giving is the Negev Highlands Long-Term Social Ecological Research Platform. It's an arid environment in central Israel. It's a very water-limited environment, but also an environment that has had consistent settlement, human settlement, for thousands of years. And that's an important point because the way we approach it is looking at, okay, this is a life supporting system, a human life supporting system. What is it about this system that can provide livelihood for the people who live there? And what in the Anthropocene is happening to make these ecosystems less viable for human life. And to understand our sustainability challenges in the future, we look to the past to understand what ecosystem processes enable the supporting communities. And I just put, maybe some of the familiar faces that work in different disciplines in this platform, because my emphasis now and towards the end will be that you really need a large team of diverse expertise to really apply the WAILS framework over time in your platform. So the first thing we ask, of course, is, again, how does this arid environment, this water-limited system and nutrient-limited system support civilizations going back thousands of years, some of them agriculture-based, others pastoral civilizations, and some more contemporary civilizations. And there were the Nabateans and the Byzantines 2,000 years ago. There was consistent Bedouin settlement and pastoral nomadism, and there's more modern agricultural and urban settlement today as well, coexisting, of course, with pastoralists. And the model that we've developed to explain this system, to understand how it is that this is a life-supporting system, is that there are three types of diversity interacting. And that starts with geodiversity, the landscape physical characteristics, the topography, the rock to soil ratio, the infiltration rates, those physical qualities of the landscape. There's the biodiversity, the non-human organisms that live in this region. And then there's the human organisms, or the social diversity of different societies that have risen and fallen within this ecosystem and have utilized the resources. And when we consider what it is that creates the system we observe today, we have to understand the interaction of those three diversity types. So we start with geodiversity. Again, as I said before, that's the topography, that's the rock cover, that's the infiltration rates. And the geodiversity is really the first order determinant of how resources are distributed across the landscape. And when resources that, in particular water, but we can talk about nutrients as well, are distributed from the sky when they fall in the form of precipitation or collect in the form of dew, they're redistributed by the geodiversity. That is, larger amounts of water collect in certain areas at the micro and macro scales. And when the water collects in patches, then it can create the necessary concentration of water or nutrients to enable life forms to take root there. Where precipitation alone would not provide enough water for most higher life forms, the redistribution of that water and nutrients across the landscape create patches which enable vegetative growth, and then the animal life that utilizes that vegetative growth, that primary productivity. Once geodiversity has redistributed these resources, then we have biodiversity, which through their activities also affect either reinforcing the patterns that the geodiversity determine or creating new patterns. We call the actions of these organisms on the environment ecosystem engineering, where they change or modify the physical environment. Isopods do it, these small critters that dig into the soil and eat microorganisms within the soil and redistribute nutrients and create fertile patches where they dig, or where porcupines dig for geophytes and leave behind these holes that then collect more water as well and collect windblown seeds and create, again, small patches of very high productivity. So you have the geodiversity and then you have the biodiversity, and those micro scale impacts of the biodiversity also can scale up and determine how water is distributed, or nutrients, nitrogen or other nutrients, are distributed across the landscape at broader scales, along with the geodiversity, like the concentration of water within riverbeds or across plains. And then from that, you superimpose the human or social diversity. And the social diversity is where humans exploit and take advantage of the fact that you can produce agriculture, and they even remanipulate the environment. For instance, in this previous picture where you see human developed terraces, which really mimic the geodiversity and manipulate it even more to concentrate that water in wadi beds or in the plains that enable agriculture. And of course, pastoral activity as well utilizes the concentration of vegetation to feed domesticated animals that are adapted to the arid environment as well. But in the process of utilizing the environment, the emphasis here is that humans even manipulate and modify the environment even more. So that's a very, very simplistic overview. But what we want to emphasize again is that in order to understand how the environment has in the past supported human development and what we're doing now that either supports or degrades the environment depends on understanding how these nutrients and water and vegetation and biodiversity are distributed across the landscape and how they can be manipulated to increase the amount of capacity for vegetation if it's agriculture or just wild vegetation. And those interactions, starting with the geodiversity, which are the drivers, and then the biodiversity, which implements, which utilizes and then modifies the environment, and then modulators of humans that have very specific objectives when they manipulate the environment to enhance its capacity to support human settlement. That is what gives us the system that we observe today. So that's looking back with an emphasis on we can use this knowledge into the future. And before I pass it off to Veronika, I just want to emphasize that the story that I just told you, in order to have a holistic understanding of the system, we need, one, the long-term observations, social, ecological, geological observations. We need interdisciplinary teams that have an expertise in the activities of each one of these disciplinary fields. And we need a framework, which is the WAILS framework, to try to put it all together in one holistic story so we can better understand and better advise on policy, on management for future decision making. So that was very brief. I hope it was clear enough and made the point. Now I'd like to pass it off to Veronika to look at a very different system and maybe look towards the future rather than the past.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. Yeah, I will continue, and I would like to invite you from Israel to Austria and from the past to the future. And Daniel, you have to go through this. Thanks. And I would like to start with this slide. And those of you who were at the webinar last week saw this slide already when Thomas briefly introduced one way how socio-ecological research could be integrated into the WAILS concept. And this is this figure showing our work where we develop integrated models that include, on the one hand, land use decision-making models. These are these agent-based models here on the left. And combine these land use decision-making, thanks Daniel, these land use decision-making models with ecosystem models on the other hand, for example, species distribution models, SWOT, LDNC, or other ecosystem models. Thanks. Sorry, I have to see. Yeah, just to give you a very short overview and idea of what are agent-based models. And the one that we developed in our institute, we call it SECLAND, is only one example. Agent-based model is a very prominent technique. And there are two elements included in an agent-based model. On the one hand, an autonomous decision unit, which in our case are land users, such as farmers and foresters. This is one group of elements of an agent-based model, and on the other hand, in the environment, where these actors, these farmers and foresters, interact. And when we are here talking about environment, I'm not referring only to the ecological environment, it's also related to social, economic, and political framework conditions. And these models need to be implemented by a set of rules which defines the relations between the agents, the land users, and the environment and the dynamics of this environment. And you have to put into the model a sequence of decisions and actions that can be taken by these actors. And based on simulations of this land use decision-making model, the model develops spatially explicit maps of future land use under different socioeconomic and climatic scenarios. What is important here is that the decision-making depends on two criteria. On the one hand, on the evolution of the external factors like prices and subsidies or subsidy schemes and policies on the one hand, but also it depends on the intrinsic factors of the different farmers that at the end take decisions how to use the land. And these intrinsic factors could be values, preferences, also demographic changes within the families. So these are the two drivers that at the end lead to a specific decision taken by the farmers. And in this slide, I just want to give you a very small idea of how our land use decision-making model works, because in our case, the land use decisions of the farmers on land use intensity and farm management depends above all on the satisfaction with their income and their workload. And this is something that we also use during discussions with farmers as the two main factors influencing how they can and how they do take decisions. One factor that we in the last year focused more on and also implemented into our models are extreme events. So also the severity and frequency of extreme events has a direct impact on farm income, but also workload. And also this means that the extreme event regime has an impact on the decision making via dissatisfaction. And as mentioned, at the end, the model produces spatially explicit land use maps on an annual resolution and spatially based on agricultural patches. And these outputs of our land use model serve as inputs for ecological models. Thank you. What is important to mention here is that, of course, we need a lot of quantitative data in order to implement the models. But we also need qualitative data, which means that for the development of these models, we normally conduct a stakeholder process that uses methods such as making interviews with land use experts, regional experts, decision makers, and land users themselves. We conduct questionnaires, organize workshops and focus groups to discuss all the elements and linkages that are so relevant that they should be implemented into the model. So this is normally this is a process for 1, 2, 3 years where we discuss again and again all these elements and factors and how they should be integrated into the model. Of course, the analysis of these qualitative survey methods are also based on literature and theoretical assumptions coming from the social science and decision-making processes and also coming from land use science. So the qualitative information is always a mixture of what we learn by the discussions with the stakeholders, but also based on literature and data and social science theories. Yes, and once the models are implemented and calibrated, we use them to calculate different scenarios. And just to give you an idea of how the outputs of these scenarios could look like, Daniel. You can see here for the LTCR region of Eisenwurzen, outcomes for land use intensity based on different framework conditions, based on different scenarios. So what, for example, you can see here is in the middle, the SSP1. So normally we base our scenario assumptions on the shared socioeconomic pathways scenarios. And the SSP1 scenario describes more or less sustainability scenario, global sustainability scenario, and you can see it here in the middle. And what you can see here is that the share of areas of energy crops increases significantly. You can see it in the purple areas. And you can also see that the colors become lighter, which indicates an extensification of land use under the assumptions of the sustainability scenario. On the other hand, the SSB5 scenario on the right, which is the fossil energy scenario, you can see that the colors become darker, which indicates an intensification of land use. And what you can also see through all these three scenarios is that the land use change from one land use type to the other, so from cropland to grassland, is not very high. It's relatively small, but the intensity changes between these scenarios. And the reason why the change of the land use type is relatively small is given by the fact that in this area, the topography is very specific, so it's not easy to access this region by machinery. There are also clear legal constraints. For example, 2 national parks cover parts of this area. Forests are protected in Austria, being converted into other land use forms. And of course, the traditions of farming also restrict the options, at least perceived by the farmers today for the future. Yeah, and maybe just I want to add to the slide before is that we use this kind of spatially explicit land use maps, and you can see here it's really very fine scaled as an input for different ecosystem models. And I think this will also be something that Nikos will also talk about in his talk. And I just wanted to add that I think for the further development of WAILS in the context of social ecology, a further elaboration of these kind of modeling approaches and how these results of these modeling approaches that focus more on the social dynamics, decision-making processes, this governance, institutional circumstances, combining them with other ecosystem models is one way to bring the social ecology closer to the WAILS concept. So a further development here for the future, I think, is a valuable way to go. Yeah, so to conclude, what we see, and we have developed these models in several times in different projects, mainly for the LTSR region Eisenwurzen, but we also tried already to use this model for other regions, LTSR regions. But what we learn is that land use and resource use decision-making models like this, and this is just an example of many others that do exist, are able to provide scenarios at scales that are relevant for ecosystem models. So now that when we talk about modeling, I think this is very important to have in mind to produce socioeconomic or based on socioeconomic assumptions to produce results that can be handed over for models in ecosystems, but also for questions relevant for ecosystem research. Yeah, I think you have to click several times because I'm just showing the different ecosystem models. Exactly, thanks. Another conclusion that we draw is that decision-making models of individuals allow a better understanding of the complex motivations that drives resource and land use change. So we are focusing on this element of decision-making for resource and land use because this is relevant for the ecosystem research as a next step. But of course, we in developing that kind of models, it's extremely important to have a good understanding of governance conditions, of how governance changes and changes in institutions to really directly affect land use, because this is not a one-to-one relation. Normally, there are many, many factors that interplay and have at the end or result at the end in a specific way of how land is used or resources are used. And to get a much better understanding of this complex interactions within the social, economic, and political framework. Also, this is one of the advantages of this kind of models. Another conclusion is that how we can also use these models is that we can use them for a realistic representation of actors and resource use decisions, which is in our mind very crucial for the assessment of policy instruments. So on the one hand, you can use these decision-making models to test out different theories, social theories on how people behave and take decisions, but you can also use it to implement it with all the insights that you gain from stakeholders and actors themselves, and show also these actors what happens under specific circumstances, and how do different interventions how do they affect the region, the regional development, but also the ecosystems within these regions. Another issue is that these models can also be used as communication tools. So as I showed you before, normally we develop these models in a longer stakeholder process, and we use different versions of the model to get back to the stakeholders, show them how the system behaves under specific assumptions. So these models do not only produce scientific outputs, but they also can be used as communications tools in order to structure the discussion among the stakeholders, and also among researchers and stakeholders. And at the end, in the best case, they can also be used as decision-making tools or policy tools in order to support decision-making on a policy level. And finally, one way we will go in the future more is to use the models and make them better transferable also to other regions, especially LTSCR regions. Yeah, and to conclude, this is our last slide, and this is a slide from Daniel and me together, is what we conclude in terms of social considerations in the WAILS concept is that on the one hand, ecosystem process and function can be explained through historical long-term interactions between social, geological, and biological diversity. So we need a good understanding of historical interrelations between humans, societies, and nature. And on the other hand, looking into the future, social ecological modeling is one effective tool to create future scenarios for sustainable land use and resource management. And here we see some kinds of interactions between WAILS and social ecology. And with that, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And if you have some questions, you can put them now in the chat so you don't forget. And I will give floor to Nico, and then we can take all of the questions together so that we do not record the Q&A session. So I will give now floor to Nico, who is a professor in the School of Chemical and Environmental Engineering and the director of the Health Lab. Before that role, he was a professor and director of the Environmental Engineering program at the University of Connecticut in the States. His area of expertise include watershed scale studies and modeling, heavy metal sites assessments and remediation, and sustainable agricultural development. So yes, you have your slides now ready, and we will take the questions for all three presenters after that. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon to all. And this is a very nice opportunity to give this presentation. I would like to give you an example of how we are implementing this kind of linking between the biophysical and the socio-ecological systems. It's a PRIMA project that we are implementing, and I want to give you a little bit more just to go back to what Daniel said, to have a review a little bit of what is the whole system approach. Basically, what we want to do is we want to be able to link the biogeophysical realm with the socio-ecological realm. And basically, in the middle of this biogeophysical realm is the critical zone, is the zone between the bedrock to treetop. This is the thin layer of the earth that provides all of the soil ecosystem services. So that's where the ecosystem functions are coming in place, and then the services. And of course, we have the human interaction who is using these services and the decisions that they are making, they are changing the drivers, and we have this circle that we need to try to relate and try to model and trying to see how we are making decisions and how we can make decisions so eventually we can achieve sustainability. But at the same time, especially here in Europe, we don't want to look solutions at a sectoral basis, like solutions for water scarcity. But we want to look into the WEF nexus, which means that we want to look for water security, energy security, food security, while we're maintaining ecosystem sustainability all at once. And of course, we cannot forget the impact of climate change. So these interlinkages, we need to look at all of this sector in the prism of climate change. We need to look at them, the nexus all together and try to make the appropriate decisions. So I want to give you the example that we have a project that it is running and it is halfway through. This is a project in the Jordan Valley. It's called the EcoFuture project. We have partners from Jordan, Israel, and Palestine. And the objective of the project is that we want to develop a strategic plan to combat desertification, oriented, of course, towards improving the socioeconomic welfare for the people in the Jordan Valley, as well as optimizing the welfare nexus. This is an area that it is primarily agricultural. And so we needed to see how we can work with the local stakeholders and try to make the decisions and develop the strategic plan that it will improve their livelihood. Of course, when we are talking about the Jordan Valley, we are talking about an area that has already experienced in the past 20 years significant reductions in precipitation, as well as almost 1.92%, 2 degrees Celsius average increase of temperature. So the impacts of climate change and desertification are very, they are already have been felt in the region. So when we are talking about the whole system approach, the first thing that we need to do is we need to understand the biophysical system. As I'm an engineer, and of course, it is not enough to understand the biophysical system. I need to work towards defining solutions that are going to improve the sustainability and the resilience of the area. So it is very important to have a kind of a list of different alternatives that we can choose. Nature-based solutions are solutions typically that they enhance the resilience of the area. So it is very important to have a list of solutions that you can implement in the area and solve the particular problem. At the same time, of course, and this has been my experience in so many projects, that you can develop the knowledge, you can develop the solutions, you can tell the people, but they are not being adopted. So it is important that you develop a socio-ecological approach that this becomes part of the decision making. You co-design the solutions with the people and you hope that eventually they are going to be accepted. Of course, inherent to all these solutions should be equitable development and socioeconomic justice, because if you are not improving the likelihood of the people, this is not, the solutions are not going to be applied. So we can start with, I will just go through very briefly of the biophysical, understanding the biophysical system. So, and I will give you only one example of how we did the mapping we collected the data to map the WEF resources. And we can start with the water. Here you can see the need of water that we have in the three regions of the Jordan Valley. The Jordanian region, we are using something like 206 million cubic meters of water per year. In Palestine, 32, 33, and in Israel, 134 million cubic meters of water. This is for irrigation, and you can see the amounts that we have, much less for drinking water. And of course, we estimated what is the demand, and then from the demand, you can see what would be the deficit of water that we have, and we need to try to find additional sources of water or reduce the use of the water with different means. At the same time, the thing that I want to emphasize here is that basically the area is primarily agricultural. I want to show you that in Palestine and Jordan, we have primarily agricultural use. But in the Israeli portion, we have, even though it might look small, the 17 square kilometers, which is aqua farming. However, these 17 square kilometers are very important in terms of the water budget. So you can calculate how much water they are using for irrigation and how much they are using per capita for drinking water, and try to compare that, whether this is adequate or not, if they are over-irrigating, if they can do something to reduce it, and so forth. So this mapping of this is extremely important. And similarly, it is extremely important to see the water allocation. Where is the water coming from? And because this is important in order to see the transfers of water from one area to the other, and at the same time to see the links of vulnerability because of climate change, or because of a reduced amount of water, or whatever vulnerabilities one could have in the available water that it is existing in the region today. Okay, moving on to energy. One of the things the analysis has said that the energy supply in the region right now is sufficient to cover the demand. However, the increase in all three countries is they're increasing at a very fast pace. So you need to develop strategies that you will accomplish the increases of energy supply and you cover the future demand. Moving into the food resources, here is the agricultural land use in hectares that we have and the types of crops that we have in the region. But what I wanted to emphasize here is that here are two maps. One that it is a map of the soil organic carbon, and then you have a map of salinity. And basically what we see here is that the soil organic carbon, for the most part in the Jordan Valley, is extremely low, is less than 0.5%. Which means that the soils are not fertile. And if you combine that with the degree of salinization that you have in the soils, because the groundwater is saline, and groundwater partially is being used for irrigation, then you can create a mixture that is decreasing the productivity. And an example that I want to give here is this is some data from Jordan, and you can see here some of the actual yields per ton of tons per dunum. And here I have listed some yields, maximum yields that you will have in other regions if the soil was much more fertile. And this is an illustration that between the two, if the soil in the Jordan Valley was more healthy, you could have a much higher yield in the production. And this is something that we need to start working, and that should be part of the alternatives that we will be examining. So, and then into the environment, environmental component. Here we see kind of the typical analysis of what we call the DPSIR analysis, which is the drivers, pressure, state, impacts, and response analysis. And if we look into the pressures, the drivers that we have in the area is population growth, climate change, land use change, and pollution. And that creates a series of pressures from intensive agriculture, livestock, aquaculture, tourism, and so forth. And that has impacts for surface water flow decline, groundwater depletion, soil degradation, high salinity, erosion, wastewater pollution, loss of biodiversity, and so forth. So we are in the process of spatially geolocating and analyzing these impacts. And for each of these impacts to try to identify a list of different alternatives and solutions. And then from there on to try to see which one will be more appropriate that will be accepted in the region. Now, when we are talking about solutions and nature-based solutions, I'm not going to get into the general analysis that that it is in the process and we are conducting of all of the alternatives on nature-based solutions that we'll do. But at the same time, we are doing pilot demonstrations. And with these pilot demonstrations, we wanted to show that we have concrete solutions that can be implemented. One example, the Jordanian pilot. One of the issues, I mean, obviously Jordan needs to have a lot of more fresh water and more fresh water supply. Well, one of the things that it is particular to Jordan, the Jordanian part of the Jordan Valley, is that they have 75 dunums of greenhouses. So one of the solutions that we are implementing is water harvesting. So if it is very easy from these greenhouses to collect the water into a local reservoir, and then from there irrigate during the winter your crops. And at the same time, by improving the soil fertility with carbon addition, we can use technology to use reduced irrigation, PV for the energy supply, also supply some water, desalinate some of the water as an alternative to increase. Only from harvesting, we can collect, if all of these greenhouses were going to, the water is going to be collected, we estimate that we are going to collect at least 20 million cubic meters of water per year, which is about 10% of what they are using right now and the demand that they have for the irrigation for the area. And this is going to be water that it is not saline, it's fresh water, it will improve the salinity of the soil and so forth. So this is one demonstration that it is very, how should I say, it is very applicable for the area, and it can solve problems that addresses all four aspects of the WEFA nexus. When we go to Palestine, there the first thing that we need to do is that we need to reuse the treated wastewater. The problem, of course, in Palestine is that we have a lot of small areas, small villages. So we need to try to use alternate ways of treatment, like compact wastewater treatment units that can be combined with desalination and reuse and be reused for irrigation. A side note is 95% of the wastewater in Jordan is being reused. And this is the first thing that we need to do to improve the water supply in Palestine, and to show that there are easy ways and cheap ways that you will be able to reuse this water, the wastewater in the area. And then for the Israeli pilot, we are focusing on aquafarms and reducing the amount of aquafarms. And at the same time, and you will see, we need to reduce the quality of the fish that they are using. So basically, there are things that we are doing is to treat the water, to change the way that they are farming. Instead of farming the fish in large ponds, to do it in smaller ponds and use the large pond to treat the water. for instance, to use algae to oxygenate the water and so forth, and reduce the amount of water used, since this is 50% of what is being used for agriculture in the area, and at the same time improve the quality that is going to return to the environment. And similarly with what they call the RCA systems, they can use higher better quality fish like salmon by heating and cooling the water, and in this way improve and be more competitive in the produce that they have. So trying to address the problems and at the same time improve the welfare nexus. These are examples. And of course, again, we have to persuade the people, and the people have to be part of the solution, and they have to be persuaded, and the strategic plan needs to be co-designed with the stakeholders. So the approach that we have been using is we are separating into two phases, and we have just completed phase A. So in phase A, we have been doing a lot of studies like this WEF nexus mapping that I explained to you, the WEF mapping that I just showed a couple of examples, socio-ecological mapping, governance mapping, and so forth. At the same time, we have run a series of models like hydrologic modeling, water allocation modeling, energy analysis, and so forth. And at the same time, we have been collecting different alternative solutions for the WEF nexus. Now, we need to understand the problems of the area. So we use the living lab approach. And I will show you the examples in a little bit of the results. And we use the causal loop diagrams to try to identify what are the challenges that they perceive in each territory, and for them to set priorities of which challenges are of the highest priority. Once we identify what are the challenges with the highest priority, we went into the next phase where we did a community capacity assessment, where we assess what is the capacity of the community to address these challenges, what are some of the problems, and so forth. And then the next phase was to try for each of these challenges to list a series of KPIs and try to quantify the gap. So in this way, we would be able to focus a little bit better. And then for each KPI, or each challenge, we have a series of solutions that we could consider that will help us to move into the next phase. And of course, the next phase is the end result of the next phase is the stakeholders in transnational living labs to co-design the strategic plan. Co-designing a strategic plan means that they needed to select the alternatives for different scenarios that will improve the welfare nexus. To support them, we are doing an ecosystem assessment analysis and NBS prioritization, which this information can get into the multi-criteria analysis, and this multi-criteria analysis, together with climate change adaptation measures and then a techno-economic analysis. This is an analysis that analyzes the water use, the agricultural product, and puts the economic analysis into the choices between costs and benefits. And then there you can optimize which produce and which area you would need to promote in order to have the best results for the area. So these three analyses and scenario from these models will support the stakeholders in terms of selecting the different alternatives and designing the strategic plan that they would think it will improve the welfare of each region alone and also the whole Jordan Valley as a whole. So just to give you a couple of highlights of the results. For instance, here you can see a causal loop diagram with all of the interrelationships of this causal loop diagram is focused on the WEF nexus. Some of these aspects in here are what stakeholders consider as the highest challenges that they are facing. And the challenges, there are 9 altogether. And what we have is water quality, water demand for irrigation, soil quality, agricultural development, biodiversity, climate change, renewable energy availability, governance, and so forth. So we ask the stakeholders, once they identified the challenges, to prioritize the challenges in the region. And what it is interesting to see is that the Jordanian priorities and the Palestinian priorities are very similar. There are agricultural areas, water quality, water demand for irrigation, agricultural development are the 3 highest challenges that they are facing. And this is what needs to be addressed. On the other hand, the Israeli challenges are very different. There are climate change, competition between development and land conservation, biodiversity, renewable energy availability are the highest priorities. When we are addressing the next phases, we have to realize that there are local priorities, as well as while we are looking into the global issues that we are faced with. So moving into the next phase, we conducted because of the current geopolitical situation and the ongoing war, we conducted the assessment, what we call the transnational living labs, the Jordanian and Palestinian together, and the Israeli separately. And this was primarily because the priorities were very different. So when we looked into the bottom line for the Jordanian and Palestinian challenges that they are facing, they are due to limited educational background, limited access to proper training and capacity building activities, limited understanding of regulation and standards, and lack of access to new technologies. So again, this is where we should be focusing if we want to adapt the solutions in this area. On the other hand, the Israelis benefit from a more established environment where the primary challenge is financial. And as you could see in our pilot, we were focusing to try to address their primary concern that they have, which is the competitiveness and how they can stay in business and how they can compete in a more global environment in terms of aquaculture. So the Israelis they possess a deeper understanding of the regulation and better community organization. So once we went through, of course, there are a lot more results that we have, and I'm not going to go into. Then we went through and did a gap analysis. So for each challenge, for each area, we listed a series of KPIs. We estimated the current state and the target state, and then the gap that we have. And then again, for each challenge, we have the drivers that is causing the challenge. And then we have a series of NBS and strategies that we can consider as alternatives that in our next phase, and it will be part of the co-design of the strategic plan. So basically, the second phase is what will be the WAILS in action. So once we have established, our baseline of problems, and we have a series of tools and data that we can consider, This is the information that can feed to the stakeholders to examine alternatives and select and prioritize through multi-criteria analysis, through techno-economic analysis, the different alternatives that should be included in the different versions of the strategic plan. And the different scenarios that we are going to examine, of course, is the baseline scenario, which is the current situation. Then is the scenario where we are trying to optimize the WEF and Nexus at every country alone. And then there is a scenario where we have full cooperation and collaboration. I would call it the best friends forever kind of scenario, the blue sky scenario, where we are going to look at the Jordan Valley as a whole. So where we are right now is that we have identified the challenges. We know what is the situation and what are the potential solutions. So we need to move into what are the roadblocks and how do we overcome them in order to come up with a strategic plan that will be viable and hopefully it will be implemented in the future. And with this, I want to thank you for the opportunity to present this work.